Hi there, and welcome to 1080's Career Insights. Today we're going to be focusing on climate quitting. So I'm here with Claire and Chris, two of our career coaches.
Hi.
Hi there. Hi,
Hello.
Chris. Hiya. Nice to see you again. So the what we're going to be talking about today, I'm just putting on the wrong bangers here, is what is climate quitting. So before we do that, Claire, would you mind just giving a very brief overview as to you and what you do at 1080?
Thanks very much, Sarah. I am a career coach. I specialise in preparing people for interview, and I'm also a maternity coach, which again is something I really love doing.
Brilliant. Thank you. And Chris?
Yeah, so my career coaching really focuses on helping people to manage the transition into either a new role or within an existing role to develop their skills and move to the next level. And I especially love working with people that are going through change and transition, particularly middle managers.
Brilliant, thank you. So the idea for today's topic about climate quitting, it's quite topical on LinkedIn at the moment, and it's this idea of people kind of leaving organisations for something that's sustainable. So, Chris, you were going to talk a bit more about what actually climate quitting is, as this was your idea for this particular session, wasn't it? So over to you.
Yes, it was, and I'm always interested to see what motivates people to do what they do at work. And yeah, so to be fair, I saw an article about this, and it really ties in with a big movement that we're seeing already, which is that people are leaving the workforce in droves to work for companies whose values align with theirs. So climate quitting is, in short, it's people leaving a job or an organization because they want to make a difference within the area of climate change, which is, as we know, is such a huge issue right now. And interestingly, I mean, a few stats to back this up. I mean, KPMG did a survey recently. They found that 1 in 5 people had turned down jobs that didn't align with their values. And I was just reading a massive piece of research by Paul Pullman, who does quite a lot of is a thought leader in the area of what we call net positive. So companies making a positive impact in the world and not harming the world. And he did a survey and found that 2 in 3 in the UK and 3 in 4 people in the US want to work for companies whose values align with their own. And 2/3 of those companies do not feel that their companies are doing enough to tackle environmental issues in particular. And actually, 1/3 of employees have said that they've already left companies, and that number's higher if you happen to be in the Gen Z or the millennial space, where the company's values do not align with their own. So they're voting with their feet. So if you're a company, this is an opportunity to really sit up and take notice about what you're doing and the impact you're making in the world, especially if you want to attract and retain top talent.
Brilliant, thank you. And just to add, anyone that's watching, if you'd like to let us know that you're here, where you're from, and if you've got any kind of comments or observations on this topic or any questions. So Claire, you were going to add a bit to what Chris just talked about in terms of energy security and net zero.
Yes, I mean, I think this is so topical. I think one of the outcomes of the conflict in Ukraine we have been, we're all very aware of actually energy security and where our energy comes from. And on the 7th of February, the government instituted or reorganised and set up a new department for energy security and net zero. It has 6 stated aims, but I'll just pick out 2 of those. So one is to ensure that the UK is on track to meet its legally binding net zero commitments and support economic growth by significantly speeding up delivery of network infrastructure and domestic energy production. And the second one that I just wanted to highlight, it's to seize the economic benefits of net zero, including jobs and growth created through investment in new green industries, which is, I think, really some of the things we're going to come on and talk about.
Excellent. Thanks, Claire. That's a lot of good, useful background information here to set the scene. So we've got a couple of people that are joining. So John is from Raleigh, North Carolina, and
Hi, Don.
Michael's on the session. Looking forward to it. So thank you for commenting. Okay, so Claire, could you talk to us about the pillars of ESG, please?
Okay. Well, there's lots of fantastic frameworks out there. I'm just going to highlight 2, but there's a lot to see. ESG, environment, social, and governance. I'm going to refer to a framework set up by Christine Ury, who's the Chief Legal Officer and General Counsel for Energy Impact. And that's an organization based in Washington, which helps companies achieve a sustainable transformation. So the way they have framed their particular approach to ESG is looking at the environment, measuring the resources used, water, emissions, carbon emissions, pollution and waste, social measures, labour practices, health and safety, supply chain, EDI, and community impacts. And finally, governance, measuring the composition of boards and their structure, their anti-corruption um, uh, frameworks, and executive compensation and shareholder rights. And closer to home, if you wanted to have a look at something that has a bit more of a UK flavour or UK centric, you might want to look at the British Business Bank's guide. It's about a 4-minute read, it's very comprehensive. And for those that don't know, this is government owned but managed independently. And its sole aim really is to support British business.
Really interesting. I hadn't heard of that before we started talking.
No.
Have you, Chris?
No, that's a new one on me. That's fascinating.
It is. So we've got a few more people that have appeared. So John's from Chicago. Hi, John. Ali is saying she's from Hempson's in London. And Alison from Milton Keynes. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining. Okay, so Chris, what kind of research can people do if they want to identify ESG credentials of organisations?
Well, I think as with any company research, a good place to start is looking at company reports. So especially if it happens to be a publicly traded company, you can look at their website, see their annual reports. You can certainly find out a lot about companies through LinkedIn. I always send people off to the British Library because that is a wealth of resources there for both job seekers and business owners. And I think obviously the best way as well is talking to people and getting a sense of what companies are like, because, and I know Claire's going to touch on this in just a moment, but just because you have these credentials doesn't really mean that you're actually the right sort of company for me, that my values are going to align for you, that you actually are walking the talk when it comes to climate change. Claire, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, I was thinking particularly the sort of US framework that I was reading, and it was so comprehensive. For example, board compositions really struck me. You know, you might be a board that maybe isn't particularly diverse, but is doing amazing work in the green arena. Does that mean you wouldn't apply to that company? You know, what really speaks to you? And maybe if you're a woman, maybe you'll one day be on that board if you apply, you know. So I think it's perhaps looking at what's really important to you and to find a company that resonates with your values and what you want to achieve.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So you were talking before that there's so much to consider that you kind of do need to hone down a little bit really into what are the things that are most important.
And you learn so much. I mean, your best source of information is conversations with other people, especially people that work within those companies or within the sector that you want to go into, because there's just no substitute for that firsthand experience, I think.
Yeah, good. And obviously using LinkedIn, the company pages on LinkedIn, there's lots of good information on there. Obviously you need to kind of follow that through when you get to interview stage to see, as you say, if people are kind of walking the talk, as you said. A couple more comments have come through. So Susan is saying she's in slightly sunny Nottingham. Okay, so there's a question here from John. So I'm not sure if we're going to be able to answer this now, but I'll read it out and see what you think. So I'm just surprised at the good intentions of ESG, but similarly shocked by the way companies are forcing this so quickly. What can we expect, and what do we need to know about how to prepare the future workforce? So, Chris, have you got any initial thoughts on that?
Wow, that's a really great question, John. I think it's twofold. I think, I think in terms of preparing the future workforce, it comes down to really understanding the skills that we need in order to be future fit. And I tend to refer to the World Economic Forum because they've identified like the top 25 skills that we need in order to thrive, really not just in the future workplace, but in the now workplace. And so many of those skills are exactly what we need to try and tackle some of the issues that we have here around climate change and climate quitting and so forth. In terms of why companies are forcing this so quickly, yes, that's an interesting one, John, because I'm wondering as I see that question whether this is a case of I'm trying to jump on the bandwagon because clearly people are quitting because they want to have they want to work for companies that have ESG credentials or that are aligned with a common purpose. But I'd say that it's back to our question before. You need to really look into things and find out what is actually really going on, what's really right for you. And I think as an individual, the best thing you can do is to prepare yourself to be as future fit as you can to be employable in the current marketplace.
Brilliant, thank you. Claire, have you got anything to add to that?
Well, I think, John, we're going to come on to this in near the end of our conversations, because there's going to be we're going to talk a little bit about the universities that are actually now sharing courses that are really helpful in terms of thinking through climate change and how you can be, for example, a chemist that is using sort of green processes, and this is now being taught at university. So we'll come on to that in a bit later on in our conversations.
Excellent, thank you, Claire. So we've got a couple more people. So Jill is saying she's from Sevenoaks in Kent. So thanks, Jill, for joining. Michael's saying at the outset you need to align organisational purpose and values of the employees. And then Vina is saying individual company ESG credentials are pertinent. I'd urge a review of the respective industry and existence of collective initiatives. This demonstrates commitment to purposeful change to me. So thanks very much for joining the conversation there, Vina. Okay, so kind of leading on from that then, so B Corp certification, Chris, what can people do about this, and how does that help with attracting client candidates?
Well, I think just to build on the last couple of comments, I was thinking it was a perfect lead-in, that absolutely you need to align values with purpose. And what B Corp certification demonstrates is that a company actually has a commitment to hopefully the values that they're speaking in terms of reducing inequality, driving social mobility, actually looking at their impact on the environment and people out in the world, and ensuring that people are engaged and they have that sense of purpose and meaning, and they're part of a greater cause that's moving forward. So obviously with what we've just spoken about in terms of what people are looking for in these current jobs and why they're leaving, clearly B Corp certification certainly demonstrates a commitment to being the type of employer that would attract employees in this space, I think. Wouldn't you agree, Claire?
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Great. Okay, we've got more comments coming through here. So John saying, as a transportation manager, any thoughts on how to calculate my carbon footprint by all modes? Oh, wow. I've got no idea on this. Have you got any idea, either of you? Have you done any research into carbon footprints?
I've got to be truthful and say that's not my area of expertise.
No.
But I'm certainly mindful, having worked with people that worked in transportation and logistics, why that would be something that you'd be thinking about right now, because it has such an impact on so many different areas. I mean, I'd just be curious to know what it is, what's behind your question, John? Why would you think about calculating it now?
Great, okay. And John saying, thanks for the answer so far. Look forward to the rest of the meeting. Thanks for doing this 1080. Thank you. And Alison saying, I think fit is critical. So going back to about aligning values. Okay, so Claire, you were going to talk a bit about the green economy, and if someone wanted to move into the green economy, how would they go about doing that?
So when I was preparing for this conversation, I was in dialogue with someone who a couple of COPs ago was the UK's lead negotiator for the country, and also somebody from the UN who advises not only the UN but governments on how to make their economies and their environment greener. So that was the sort of the conversations that I'd had. I think what we're talking about in essence is for clients to move from interest to aptitude, to being a polished candidate. And I think this is kind of a multi-layered approach. So I think if you were interviewing somebody, you'd want to feel that they had been quite rigorous in their thinking. It wasn't just something that they felt strongly about, but actually they really thought it through, and they, for example, done some academic study for I'm in no way endorsing any of these particular courses, but they may be worthwhile exploring if this is helpful to you. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation has a number of its own courses that it runs, but it also sets out, it has one of its pages where it sets out the different universities and what they are doing in terms of courses that have a green bias. So as I mentioned before, the University of Bath is the first signatory for a green chemistry commitment. And it's a charter to train the next generation of chemists in theory and application for green principles. So doing it, doing their experiments in such a way so that it's got environmental solutions. And there's a whole range of universities. For example, in Europe, there's Bocconi, who I guess most people have heard of, and their finance masters, which I think is currently rated about 7th in the world, according to the FT, in terms of its, how good it is as a course. It now has a whole section on the circular economy. So again, that might be something worthwhile exploring. If people were a bit more time poor and they couldn't invest necessarily in a master's or a full-time degree, there is a masterclass in the circular economy at the University of Exeter. And that's 6 weeks and online, and that might be of interest to people. And also, the United Nations has lots of courses which are online, which, there's something for everybody. I think there's so many different aspects that they look into. And also nature.org is also an organisation that's really worthwhile looking at. So obviously, whenever you get to interview, hopefully you've got some sort of qualification, you've shown that you're really passionate about what you're doing. But then they might say, the interviewer might say, what's your current thinking on X? Because this is such it's a fast evolving dialogue, isn't it? There's so much we're learning about this issue. So you might want to be reading, the Financial Times, The Economist, and a name that sort of kept cropping up in my sort of research and conversations was Nicholas Stern. You may want to follow him on Twitter. I think he's Lord Stern now, and he was the first economist that put economics into climate change. He started putting numbers around the whole aspect of climate change. Finally, I think people will want to know what you've done. As we've touched on, climate change is such a huge, big issue. So what is it that really motivates you and resonates with you? Is it the oceans? Is it changing how we use the soil and farming and so forth? And is it maybe about fast fashion and how we approach what we wear? Going to thrift shops or whatever that might be. So I think it's about finding what really resonates for you and gives you, makes you want to be involved, getting involved in a local group and playing your part so that when somebody talks to your interview, what are you actually doing? You can speak from personal experience about what matters to you and how you are part of the change.
Really, really good point there. Chris, have you got anything to add on that?
Well, I was going to say, just building upon that, I'd say, and those are fantastic resources. I'm definitely going to be signposting some of my career clients to those courses as well. So thanks for that, Claire. It's a brilliant piece of research. I'd really build on what you're saying in terms of two things. Firstly, really being clear on what it is that you are passionate about in this space, because climate change is there's quite a lot of scope there. So you've got to narrow that down. And especially thinking about when you're telling people that you're looking for jobs in this space, it's having that story. It's, I was here, this thing happened that's raised my consciousness around this aspect of climate change. This is why I want to do X now, and being able to kind of tell that story with passion and conviction. And secondly, as Claire was saying, get involved. There was someone I knew that made a change into this space recently, and they'd gone to a number of different events. They'd gotten involved in different volunteer organizations. And one person that they had talked to had said, look, I wouldn't even interview anyone if I looked at their CV or their profile and I did not see that they were actively involved in some form of volunteering. And this actually was a strategy that worked really well for one of my former clients who followed the COP, one of the latest COP conferences online on Twitter. and then from there found a whole host of other charitable organizations doing climate change and got involved, actually getting some experience with one of those organizations locally, which in turn led to him being offered a role on secondment to get some actual experience. So that, you know, it's a process. It's like any job transition into a new industry. You've got to become familiar with that sector, what's going on, identify what it is that you're passionate about in there, where you fit in, and then getting involved in different things to show people how you can come in, how you can add value, and actually getting, you know, showing people that you're a part of that world already, if you like.
Brilliant. Really good tips there from both of you. Thank you very much. So I can see that there's some more comments coming through. So John is saying the B Corps movement is very interesting. The other John is saying want to calculate it to determine the minimum level of investments in renewables. Okay, thank you. And then John saying here, this is where he's learned about the B Corp. So we will put in all the links at the end on the chat. So all of the research that Claire's done into all of those courses, we'll add those in. So that's great. Thank you. So Chris, you just kind of started on our next question there. So about any client examples of people that are moving into these kind of roles or wanting to move into those roles. Is there any others that you'd like to talk about?
I mean, I think the key success story that springs to mind is the one I mentioned with the gentleman that followed the people on COP. He was a senior leader in his organization and had just decided that he wanted to make a shift later in life and followed on in those footsteps. Another individual I knew, they went along to a load of events. They got asked to write pieces. They just got involved doing things, and they've been able to move into sectors that way. And other clients I've known that have managed to maybe not necessarily go into a climate related role, but going into a company that's doing something around sustainability and social responsibility. It's tended to come from being very clear on what it is that they want. You know, what are their values? What is their, I like to call it your career criteria. You know, what are all the things that you would need to feel happy and be able to contribute in that role? And it's amazing how once you get focused on that and you start communicating that to people out in the wider world, it starts to fall in line and you start to notice or, you know, move in that direction and find things that way. I was just going to add off the back of the how would I move into that role, there are a few websites, we'll put those links in the chat, that do specialize in sustainability. There's one called Acre, which is a specialist recruiter in sustainability. There's another called Green Jobs. And there's also sustainability consultancies that specialize as well. And so finding out about these organizations as well, because consulting is an interesting one. It's so many skills that we have from other areas are highly transferable. It's getting people to see that. And in a funny way, sometimes going into consulting is an easier, people can see the transferability because consulting touches upon so many different aspects and industries and so on. But I think those are the two main examples I would have of actual clients. Yeah,
that's good. I mean, a lot of the clients that I work with I'm mainly kind of helping them with their LinkedIn presence and moving into these kind of areas. And one of the questions I talked to them about initially is, are you looking for a sustainable organization or a department within a general company that is focused on sustainability for them? So I think that's quite an interesting one, and perhaps you're in a company where you could move internally into that sustainability department and build up your knowledge that way. So there's lots to think about, isn't there?
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, you saying that, sorry, just sparked, I have a client that did just that, who was in an HR role and wanted to get into ESG and sustainability, and they had someone in the organization that was working in that area, and through a conversation with her manager was able to get the opportunity to do some work in there. And that's a great way to try it out as well, because sometimes you're not 100% sure what it is that you actually want to do in this space until you actually start working within it. So anything you can do, even to just get involved where you are now, to find out about sustainability or what your organization is doing in this area, can really help you to clarify what it is that you're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. I had one client who was really interested in recycling, so moved into facilities and ended up going out to all these different recycling plants to see what was possible and practical within the work environment. So again, really good intro to be able to move outside later on if that's what you want. Claire, do you have any?
Yeah, I was going to say about, actually, I think it can be quite challenging to move from your existing role to a green role. To your point about actually moving inside your company, and one of our contributors earlier in our call said about companies moving very quickly. So actually, I think probably, there will be, at the end of this call, there will be so many more jobs in this sector, because companies will be starting up departments to actually support their ESG credentials. So your company might not have it now, but in 6 months' time, there may be a department that you could transfer into with supporting their ESG credentials, or creating them. You could be part of the group that creates and navigates or identifies the correct strategy for your industry.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Michael's just commented to say, good point. For example, asset management companies will have sustainable funds as part of their portfolio. So yeah, that's it. There's lots to think about, isn't there? And I guess it doesn't even have to be an actual move in your company. It could be that there's a task force being set up, or maybe you can actually instigate that task force for a particular thing. But like you say, it's about pinpointing what it is that's really important to you, isn't it, to avoid this massive potential area.
And you might often find that once you make your desires known, that you might find that there's other people out there that feel the same way you do. And it's a case of being the change, as it were, isn't it? And so nothing is more exciting than actually spearheading the very thing that you're passionate about.
Absolutely. Claire, do you have any client examples, or should we move on to the next question?
I have a client springs to mind. They are moving into that sector. They haven't quite got there yet, but they're doing all the right things. But it is a transition, and it's about, I think, for that individual finding just the right thing for them.
Yeah, good. So much like most job searches, really, isn't it? It's making sure that it's the right thing for you rather than just jumping. And I guess that's it. If it just because it's a role in sustainability doesn't mean it's going to be the right one for you, does it?
Yeah.
Good point. Okay, so we've talked already a bit about training or development available for people wanting to work in this area. Claire, have you got anything else to add to what you've already talked about on that question?
Well, I was amazed how much there was out there. And actually, so much of it is quite practical. So there are obviously university courses, which are, big investment, both sort of probably financially and in terms of time. But there are things you could do just at the weekend. If you just wanted to dip your toe in the water and just think, is this for me? And so many different aspects to it. As I've said, so many different aspects. So I definitely recommend, I'd recommend just having a look around. There are so many different courses.
Excellent, thank you. And Chris, anything you want to add on that one?
I think we pretty well covered it. I would just say that obviously the best training is really to get involved and to do something, even if you're not 100% sure that you've got the skills or the abilities to do it. It's a great opportunity to just try out things and see what you're capable of, see where you can contribute.
Brilliant. Okay. And I wanted to mention the LinkedIn UK top jobs in 2023. So I'm just going to quickly share this screen. So basically what this is LinkedIn run a survey each year which identifies the top roles. So in this case, it's 25 roles. And this is based on people updating their profile. So number 2 of most increased roles is a sustainability manager. So this gives you a bit of information about the role. And then down here, you'll see here, it says build your skills in sustainability. So from that link, what you can get here is a whole library of material on that. So that's all part of LinkedIn Learning. So that is a payable service, and obviously we don't work for LinkedIn, so we're not actually promoting that. But I think it's a really, really good resource, and good to see that these roles are definitely on the increase. Okay, I'll just remove that share now. I'll put a link to that in the comments at the end. Okay, so I can see we've got another comment here. So okay, so Michael saying, John, I'm not sure this will meet your specific needs, but I do know those participating in F1 motorsport calculate their carbon footprint for offsetting purposes. Can you network your way to someone in that industry? Okay, that's a good tip. Thank you, Michael. Okay, so we are about out of time now. So as usual, we try to end with a top tip. So Chris, have you got a top tip for people as we're leaving the session?
I guess I'd say, whatever sector it is that you want to shift into, it's it's a similar process to any other form of career transition. It's doing the legwork, it's figuring out what you want to do, it's identifying, sorry, my voice is going, it's identifying the best way to find out about anything that you're not sure of when it comes to careers. I really believe is to find and meet other people via LinkedIn, having what we call informational interviews, researching companies, reaching out to people that you admire that are doing great things in this space. Just comment and engage on their posts on LinkedIn. If you're not too sure how to get involved, you'll be absolutely amazed how many connection requests you get just by engaging with other people's content in this space as a nice way of dipping your toe in the water. And I'd say don't give up, because I think sometimes when we go about making these career transitions, we tend to be a bit discouraged sometimes and fall at the first hurdle if it's not immediately obvious what we need to do. And often it's just a case of persisting, having more conversations. So many skills that people have out there in other sectors are extremely transferable to this sector and this energy. They need people with all the skills that we see in other sectors and industries out there. So I would encourage you to persist and not to give up. And obviously listen back to this podcast for more great top tips.
Thank you, Chris. And Claire, top tip from you.
I think Chrissy was like took the words right out of my mouth. So I would just finish up with be brave and follow your passion.
Brilliant, thank you. So thank you very much to everyone that's been watching and interacting, and especially thank you to Claire and Chris for the huge amount of research that you've done on this topic. So it's really, really great. And as I said, I will go through the comments later on and add links to the things that we've talked about during the session. So next month, we're back with 2 live sessions. So on the 21st of March, I'm going to be talking to Trevor Meriden, Maria Mann, and Maria's client, Anja Woolstorm, about self-employment and if it's right for you. And then on the 28th of March, we're kind of following on from this session, actually. So I'm going to be talking to Liz and Cecilia Crossley. And it's going to be talking here about your HR strategy, and that is delivering ESG results and how that helps you to attract and retain talent. So it's kind of the follow on to this. So really looking forward to those conversations. So thanks again. I can see we've got a few comments coming in. So Michael saying a lively session, thank you. And Susan saying thank you. And Alison is saying thanks, ladies, great tips as always. Okay, so thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.